Hey, this is Bartik again with StartupMath.com. Last time we talked about what the cap table of a company looks like right after it was incorporated. In that case, the company had 1 million shares and the founders owned 100%. Now let's imagine that it's a couple months down the line and the founders think that they need to raise venture capital money or angel money. How does that change their ownership? And that can be addressed by looking at a cap table with this ownership section added to it. So let's assume that the company thinks they need to raise $500,000. What basically happens is the number of shares that are in the company have to first be valued. All of those shares combined equal the whole company. And it is at that per share price value that the new investor purchases additional shares that get created specifically for that round. So in this case, there were 1 million shares in the company, let's just say is worth $2 million. That means each share is worth $2. And if the new investor puts in $500,000, that's going to allow that investor to purchase 250,000 shares. So there were 1 million shares to begin with, 250,000 shares were created, and then the total number of shares here is 1.25 million. The new seed investor owns 250,000, which represents 20% of the company. And because now the new investor effectively bought 20% of the company with that $500,000, the founders have been diluted by 20%. If we change this number, the amount of dilution changes. So let's say instead of $500,000, the company only wants to raise $400,000. Well, they only have to sell 16.7% of the company to raise that 400K. So let's bring this back to 500,000. Whoops. Let's assume instead of a $2 million valuation on the company, let's assume it's only worth $1.5 million. So now that $500,000 was able to allow the investors to purchase 25% of the company. So one of the reasons why pre-money valuation is such a often talked about topic in venture capital and entrepreneurship is because it has a very direct relationship to the amount of dilution that the founders have to get to raise that amount of money. So one thing that's a little bit confusing is the idea of pre and post money. And here's kind of a pretty easy way to understand it. So let's just imagine in this case, let's go back to $2 million as the pre, that the company is worth 2 million bucks before the investment. After the investment, it's the company now has $500,000 in the bank. So now the company plus the $500,000 is worth 2.5 million. So a really easy way to think about that is with an example. So imagine I gave you a Coke can, and that Coke can is worth $1. So its pre-money valuation is $1. Now let's say I put a $10 bill on top of that Coca-Cola can. How much is that entity now worth? Well, it's worth $1 plus the $10 bill that I put on top of it, so it's worth $11. That's the exact same kind of math associated with companies. Um, One thing to keep in mind is that when venture capitalists put money into a company, they want that money to generate more value than its cash equivalent. So in this case, the company raised $500,000 and its post-money valuation is 2.5 million. But if this company is able to take that $500,000 investment and generate more value than $500,000, in theory, the pre-money valuation of the next round should be higher than $2.5 million, and that's called an up round. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes that $500,000 that was invested actually generates less than $500,000 value, which means that the pre-money valuation of the next round would actually be lower than the post-money of the first round, which is a down round. We'll talk about that more later, but for now, I just encourage anybody who's interested to play around with the attached workbook. Feel free to change these numbers, and you can see exactly what effect that has on the ownership of the founders and the ownership of the investors. Bye.